Mopeds are an integral part of their lives, and getting to know each other here is easy. What you need to know before traveling to Vietnam. Greetings! Today, we're going to look at the key features of life in one of the most famous countries in Southeast Asia. Let's talk about the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. You will finally find out why there are so many mopeds here, which almost every resident of the country has. What the Vietnamese are most embarrassed of, and therefore always wear medical masks. Is it true that in Vietnam it is not very difficult to find a soulmate, but at the same time, you can easily fall for scammers? Be sure to watch the video to the very end, because this way you will learn a lot of useful and informative information on this topic. It's not an easy path from an undermined economy to the wealth of the country. Those of you who have at least once been interested in the history of Vietnam, of course, know about what this country had to endure. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam, this is the official name of the state, went through severe trials in the 20th century. It is enough to remember that the Vietnamese actively opposed the Japanese Empire at the beginning of the Second World War. In 1945, Vietnam still managed to defend its independence. But 10 years later, a new confrontation began in the country. It was during this period that Vietnam was divided into two parts, North and South, after which the Vietnamese began to fight with the United States. This war lasted for 20 years. It is quite natural that the economy of the country was significantly undermined. We had to rebuild the state. Who would have thought that the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in a few years would turn from an economically backward to a developed country in the world? These events began to occur in the second half of the 1980s. It was then that the Vietnamese government announced the development of the country's economic system. For example, in 2023, the GDP of the country amounted to $420 billion. And the income received by the Vietnamese population can even compete for Russia. Most residents of the southeastern country try not to deny themselves in everyday purchases and things. Unfortunately, as in the whole world, there is a share of the population that is below the poverty line. According to official sources, it is 4% of the total number of residents. It is not difficult to calculate that there are 4,007,811 poor residents for 100,195,275 Vietnamese. Nevertheless, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam continues to develop, and not only economically. The country has a well-developed tourism sector as well as transportation. Surely many of you have noticed that Vietnam is literally overflowing with mopeds and motorcycles. Why this happened? Let's understand in order. Crowded roads and highways. So, the main advantage of two-wheeled transport for the inhabitants of Vietnam is its availability and cheap service compared to a car. In addition, mopeds and motorcycles are much easier to get from one point to another. In the case of a car, not all Vietnamese are willing to buy one. That is why the best option is to purchase two-wheeled transportation. Did you know that the roads and highways of Vietnam cities are so crowded that there is an increased risk of accidents? This circumstance draws the attention of many tourists who come to the country. No wonder that you will have to spend half an hour to simply walk half a kilometre. By the way, for this purpose, many are accustomed to call a cab or pass in comfortable buses. At a price, such trips are quite acceptable. For example, if you have $6, you can easily pay for a bus pass and use it for a whole month. Some Vietnamese traditions. Do you agree that the culture of Asian countries is many times different from European countries? We are, of course, referring to the cultural traditions of the inhabitants of Vietnam. Well, let's talk about some of them. Firstly, Vietnamese at the entrance to the house or other premises necessarily take off their shoes. Instead, they put on a change of shoes, which can be given out in specific organizations if possible. It is also allowed to go barefoot. This culture is connected with elementary ethics and rules of respect for those present. Moreover, this feature is also common in other Eastern countries, for example, in Japan and Thailand. Secondly, Vietnamese people are among the most hard-working people in the world. A clear proof of this is many hours of work in rice fields and plantations. But that's not all. Vietnamese are accustomed to get up early. Many start their working day from 4 a.m., after which they make sure to exercise. And in organizations, employees are allowed to sleep right at the workplace for 1 hour. This is something like inamuri, which is the practice of daytime sleeping in Japan. Third, the constant wearing of medical masks. Tell me honestly, have you ever noticed such a seemingly strange detail? Yes, Vietnamese people do wear masks regardless of pandemic and other similar factors. This culture is either due to the shyness of tanning from the sun's rays or the desire to maintain good health. In the former case, Vietnamese people try to hide their skin, which takes on a yellowish tint from exposure to the sun's rays. People are simply embarrassed by this image. Therefore, they try to keep the external cover of the body as snow white as possible. Someone even buys creams and uses special cosmetics, which are quite expensive. Some girls and women use umbrellas as well as gloves. In the second case, people protect their respiratory organs from the high concentration of exhaust gases. As you have probably already guessed, the city streets of Vietnam are crowded with transport, hence the accumulation of harmful substances. Vietnamese people try to keep their health at the proper level, but medical masks are not so effective in this case. Here, you need a comprehensive approach and more modern methods of self-defense for those who want to organize their personal life in Vietnam. And now it's time to talk about dating Vietnamese girls. Many people will be interested in this topic, particularly for those who will decide to move to Vietnam and settle their personal life there. Perhaps let's start with the positive aspects. There are a lot of beautiful and free in terms of relationships girls in Vietnam, and their openness to dating is the main advantage. If suddenly you see a girl who walks towards you and suddenly stops, then success is guaranteed. This is a sign that a person is really interested in getting acquainted. The girl slows down her gait and then begins to think or look around. But if she is in a hurry and does not pay attention to others, she has no desire to get acquainted with a young man. But there is the other side of the coin. In Vietnam, cases of fraud involving young girls are becoming more frequent. The essence of deception is as follows. In the late hours of the day, Vietnamese girls gather near bars, nightclubs, or expensive establishments. They are the first to take the initiative to get acquainted. Then they approach the future victim, talk to her, and thereby inspire some trust. The last step, pressure on pity and lure young people out of large sums of money. Some really fall for such a divorce and thereby give almost the last money that is available. So be careful and do not fall for such a trick.